Welcome, podcast listeners. My name is Ellen, and we're going to do a podcast today about beginning your IELTS preparation. So, you're new to IELTS, you don't know anything about it. So, where do you start? How do you start? What do you do? It can be so overwhelming. So, that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit today: where to start, how to start, and basically what your first steps into your preparation should look like. Okay, so the first most important step really is, I think, the beginning of everything. It's arming yourself with appropriate information. Maybe you want to study abroad. Maybe you want to go to another country to live and to work. But what's super, super important here is finding the necessary information regarding your English language requirements. So the first step that you need to take is to absolutely and 100% understand what your English language requirements are. Okay, so is IELTS your only option? And if it is, which IELTS? Do you need IELTS General? Do you need IELTS Academic? Because this will change a lot of things in the course of your study. Once you know whether you need IELTS General or IELTS Academic, it's also extremely important to understand what the minimum scores are for each of the parts, as well as for the overall score. Okay, even when you're applying to universities, even for the same course of study, it is possible that one school will have a score or a set of scores that is much more lenient, much more lax than another set of schools. So what you need to find out is what is the hardest, what is the strictest score that you need, and have that as your goal. So that's really one of the first steps, okay? Or maybe if that score is so strict and difficult, then maybe you need to reassess your goals and say, well, maybe this particular school is not for me because I'm not going to be able to get the score that they need. So that's a couple of the first things, really arming yourself with some preparatory information as far as what you need, what kinds of scores you need, and what tests you need to take from IELTS, General or Academic. Once you have that information, you need to arm yourself with some more kind of tidbits of knowledge. I think a really good starting place is the IELTS.org website. It is the official website. So go ahead, look it up, find as much information as you can about the test. At this point, some of you may not know anything about the test. So find out as much as you can. Understand that there are 4 different tests. There's listening, there's reading, there's writing, there's speaking. There's no specific section that has grammar and vocabulary as such, but grammar and vocabulary are tested indirectly throughout the test, and so this is the kind of information you need to know. Now, once you find out some things about the test, how it's timed, what types of questions are asked in the different sets, in the different sections. Find out all the information. See what you can learn about the test. Are there just true and false questions? Are there long answer questions? Are there multiple choice questions? Try to discover all this information from reliable sources like IELTS.org. And I really stress reliable because there are a lot of IELTS websites out there. Unfortunately, not all of them are 100% accurate. Not all of them are 100% reliable. I really believe that everyone is trying to do the best job they can. But unfortunately, there is some misinformation out there. So make sure you really stick to some reliable sources of information for your preparation, and just get the information that you can. So once you've more or less familiarized yourself with some of the question types, what's going on with the test and so forth, it's really important to understand what your level is. Okay, so let's say, for example, you want to apply to a school where it has a minimum of 7 in each of the 4 parts. Okay, it's very, very important to understand what that is. What does it mean to have a 7 in writing? What does it mean to have a 7 in reading or listening or speaking? Okay, so one of the things you need to do is understand your level. Okay, a lot of people sometimes see those levels and think, okay, well, great, it's out of 9, so hey, I can get a 7. That's easy. I mean, if I'm a 6 potentially or a 5 potentially, I have good English. 7 should be a piece of cake. Well, maybe, but not necessarily. So it's really important to know what your level is to see how your level relates to the score that you need. Okay, so how do you find out your score? There are there are a handful of ways. A couple of them happen to be easy. One way to find out your level, more or less, is to take an actual test. Obviously, you can't get your level for speaking or writing, but what you can do is take a couple of reading tests, take a couple of listening tests, and see where your score is. If you have your raw score, like let's say, for example, you get 36 out of 40 correct, then all you need to do is to type into your favorite search engine IELTS raw score conversion, or not even IELTS score calculator. And then you take that score, your 36 out of 40, and then you put it into a little calculator and they tell you, okay, well, a 36 out of 40 is this band in IELTS. Okay, so that's what you need to do for listening and reading. Don't take just one test. Take one test to kind of familiarize yourself, to see what the test is about, the kinds of questions, the kinds of things they ask you, okay, the sorts of things you need to look for while you're taking the test, and then take 1 or 2 more to actually gauge your level. Now, why do I stress gauging your level as being so important? Well, once you know where you are in the test, then that will help you prepare and understand how much time you need in order to potentially raise your level. We'll get to that in a minute. Another thing that you can do, besides taking an actual test, is take an online placement test. There are a lot out there, okay? There are some that you may feel are a little more reliable than others, but allow yourself to take a good online placement test that will somehow show where you are in terms of level. Now, what you want essentially is to find out where you are either in the IELTS scale or in the CEFR scale. The CEFR is the Common European Framework. And what that will do is that will tell you things like whether you're a B1 or B2 or an A1 or an A2 or even a C1 or C2. So there are levels in Europe that kind of show where you are in terms of language in the particular European language that you speak, okay? So English obviously being one of those languages. So if you take an online test, that's one gauge. If it says that you're a C1, for example, then what you can do is very easily, again, use a search engine and say IELTS on a CEFR scale. And you'll find that a C1 equals about 7 or 7.5 in IELTS. So that's the kind of information you need to know. You need to know where you are. In other words, how close or how far you are from the score that you actually need for your particular goal, whether it's immigration, whether it's study, work, whatever. But you need to know where you are currently and where you need to be. Okay, so you need to do a little research into this, whether it's taking some placement tests, whether it's taking some IELTS tests, but this is work that needs to be done. Once you know your level, you have to see, okay, well, how close am I to the score that I need? Okay, so that will determine how much time you need to study. IELTS is something that does require some time. If you're at a C1 or a C2, maybe you'll need less time. But if you're at an A2 or a B1, according to the Common European Framework, then you're going to need some time to improve your English level. This is important. And I know that it's something that disheartens some IELTS students, but it's something that absolutely needs to happen. IELTS is not a test that you can kind of trick, that you can kind of, master it through trickery or through different sorts of sorcery, so to speak. You actually have to do the work. It does really accurately show your level. So if you need a 7 in your IELTS all across the board, but you're not at a 7 level, the test is going to show it. So it's really important to get your language to that level so that it can be indicated in your IELTS. So what do? Once you know your level, you really need to make some important decisions here. Are you going to study on your own? Are you going to study with a tutor? Is it going to be online? Is it going to be in person? But you're going to need to make some choices depending on a lot of different factors about how you're going to improve your language level so that you have that base, you have that foundation in order to prepare for IELTS. So let's say you need a 7, but your language level, based on the tests that you have taken, is around a 6. Well, it's going to take some work, and that work is going to take some time. So you're going to need to improve a variety of different areas of your language. You're going to need to work on listening, speaking, grammar, vocabulary, writing. You really can't neglect any particular section. Okay, so improving your level, especially when you're aiming for one of those higher levels, but you've got a bit of a distance, and when I say a distance, I mean over 1 band score from where you need to be, then you're really going to need to work to lay down that language foundation and make sure that you have the tools that you need. Okay, so you're going to have to work on all of those areas, all those skill levels, maybe some of them more than others, but speaking, listening, writing, reading are all areas that you'll need to work on. Definitely some grammar and definitely some vocabulary. And this, of course, will need some time. Now, one of the things that I recommend, maybe you don't need so much work, maybe you're close but not quite there. One of the things that I think is really, really important in preparing for IELTS is reading and listening to English language. There are a lot of different resources out there. There's not a lot, actually, there's endless amounts of information out there. Some of them are really, really well suited to IELTS, more so than others. So personally, if you ask my opinion, I would say that if you're going to be reading online, then the BBC is a wonderful place to start. The Guardian, the New York Times, a lot of these really well-known, well-respected newspapers, online version or print version, are excellent resources. Now, what do I suggest? I suggest reading first to understand the actual message. Read it for comprehension. Read it to understand, to learn something about the news, to kind of practice reading in general. But then read it again. And after that, read it again. So each time you read an article, you're looking for something different. The first time you might be reading just to get a general idea. The second time you read it, you might be kind of trying to understand some areas that you didn't understand the first time. The third time you read it, really pick it apart for areas of grammar and vocabulary. These kinds of newspapers are wonderful resources for bits of grammar that may kind of be difficult for you to get elsewhere. So I mean things like prepositions. Which prepositions do we use with which words, where? Prepositions are a huge problem for a lot of IELTS students, as are articles. In fact, there are certain languages I have discovered over the years, there are certain languages that don't use prepositions, and so when they, not prepositions, I'm sorry, that don't use articles. And so when they do have to use articles in English, they really struggle. So if you have a language that doesn't use articles, like the, and when you're reading something in English, pay attention to these. When do we use them? When do we use them with a singular? When do we use them with a plural? Are there some words that we never use an article with because they're out there? So take advantage of the articles that you're reading and read them analytically for this kind of information and not for the message, okay, but for the details and the language used. Another way to use the articles you're reading is for vocabulary, and not just vocabulary, but one of my favorite pieces of vocabulary, collocations. Collocations I've talked about lots of times in other podcasts. They're basically words that go together, not for any real grammatical reason, but just because we're so used to seeing them over and over again used together. And not just words together, but usually collocations are literally like two words together. So an adjective and a noun, or a verb and an adverb. We just put them together. And there are books about them. I know I have a couple. I love them. English collocations and so forth. You can find them. They're advanced, there's intermediate, but look them up and read and notice them. It's really important that you notice the things you're reading, and don't just skim through them like, okay, but process them. It will really, really help you later on when you're preparing for IELTS. So that's as far as reading articles and things online or in print is concerned. Now, if you've done all of this, the next thing you need to do is familiarize yourself with the banned descriptors for Task 1, Task 2 in writing and speaking. Now, I've done a handful of podcasts about this, so I'm not going to get into a ton of detail, but the banned descriptors, if you really sit and read them over and over again and try to analyze them and read into what they're telling you and what they're asking you, or if you listen to some of the podcasts where we've talked about the banned descriptors and how to analyze them, you'll find a wealth of information. It's really a guideline, not just for the person testing you or the person who's preparing you, but also there's information there that you can glean and understand what it is they are expecting from you at each particular band score. If you're not able to understand what they want from you at each band score or at the band that you need to get, then definitely seek out the help of a professional who is familiar with this information. Everything I've been talking about so far has been kind of working with the assumption that you're working on your own, that you're not working with a teacher, but I've got to be really honest with you. At some point, you're absolutely going to need the help of a professional IELTS tutor. And this is in particular if you need one of those higher band scores. If you need a 7, if you need an 8, if you need something like that, then definitely seek out the help of a professional, whether it's here at IELTSPodcast.com, where we have years of experience with IELTS, both examining and tutoring, but definitely seek out the help of somebody who knows the exam inside and out. Okay? So that's another thing you need to do. But as I said, familiarize yourself with the band descriptors so that you know what they're looking for and what they expect you to do. It's important to read them. It's important to understand them, and to get some feedback as well. So that takes us to the next thing that you need to do when you start preparing for speaking, when you start preparing for writing. Read lots of samples. Again, I'm going to say this, as I said before, the internet is a treasure trove of information. A lot of the information is priceless. It's so useful and it's wonderful. So definitely do it, look it up, use it. But not every single site, not every single sample that you see out there is created equal. Some things that you see online are better than others. So make sure you're sticking to reputable sites, to sites that you can trust when you are looking for sample essays. I say this particularly for sample essays because I've got to be honest with you. In the years that I have taught and examined, I have seen some things that are presented as examples and they are wrong. If I were to correct some of the things that I see, they would get a much lower score than the person who wrote it or who published it suggests that it would get. Nonetheless, it is important to, again, arm yourself with this information, read some sample essays, understand some things, but speaking and writing are areas where it's so important to get the help of a professional, because unlike listening and reading, which are very objective, so it's very simple. There are rules. If you spell something wrong, it's wrong. If you write 4 words instead of 3 when it asks for 3 words, it's wrong. If you give the wrong answer, it's wrong. It's very clear cut. But with speaking and with writing, there are lots of nuances. There are lots of different things that you really may not be able to understand unless you have the assistance and the guidance of a professional. So seek out that information. Seek out that help. It's a wonderful, wonderful investment in your future and one that you will most surely not regret. So these are some of the ideas that I have, some of the suggestions I have on how to begin your IELTS preparation when you have no idea where to begin, where you may feel a little overwhelmed with the task ahead of you, but it can be done, it can be overcome, and I have full faith in all of you that you can do it. So we're here at IELTS.com to help you in any way that you need. We can help you with all areas of the exam. In certain areas of the exam, we're here to assist you, to guide you in any way that you need. So definitely reach out to us for essay corrections, for the entire online course, which is a comprehensive package. But we're here to help you. We're by your side to help you reach your IELTS goals. So we look forward to seeing work from you, to hearing from you, and how we can help you get what you need to get in IELTS. So best of luck to all of you, and thanks for listening today.